Between November 3rd and 5th, 1978, 12 men were eliminated across 3 counties in eastern Tennessee. All adults, all connected to a single illegal poker game. The method was surgical, shotgun executions in parking lots, ambushes outside roadside bars, bodies left in truck beds as deliberate warnings. The perpetrators weren't organized crime, weren't rival gangs, weren't even strangers seeking random violence. They were 3 members of the Carter family, a father and his 2 sons moving through the Appalachian night like vengeful spirits, methodically erasing everyone whose name appeared on a handwritten list. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation would later call it one of the most calculated family eliminations in state history. But the motive wasn't drugs, wasn't a blood feud, passed down through generations, wasn't territory or power. It was an $8,700 gambling debt from a poker game that lasted 19 hours, and one man's unshakable belief that a blood oath, sworn palm to palm with witnesses, mattered more than any law written in Nashville or enforced by badges. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. East Tennessee sprawled across some of the most unforgiving terrain in the American South in 1978. The Tri-County area of Hamblin, Granger, and Union covered roughly 600 square miles of steep ridges, narrow valleys, and forests, so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. Population stood around 48,000, scattered across hollows and ridges where families had lived since before the Civil War. Most folks had never been farther than Knoxville, 50 miles west, where the university sat like some foreign country full of people who'd never known what it meant to work land that fought back. November in the mountains meant temperatures dropping to 32 degrees at night, climbing to maybe 55 by afternoon if clouds broke. The air smelled like wood smoke from coal stoves, damp earth where leaves rotted under bare trees, and diesel fuel from trucks grinding up impossible grades in low gear. At night, fog rolled down from the ridges, so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Sound traveled strange in that fog. Sometimes you'd hear a dog barking 3 miles away, clear as a bell. Other times you wouldn't hear footsteps 10 feet behind you until it was too late. But 1978 was a devastating year for this corner of Tennessee. The textile mills that had sustained these counties for generations were closing, moving operations to Mexico and Asia, where labor came cheaper than dirt. Tobacco prices had collapsed. Small farms that had fed families for 100 years couldn't compete with corporate agriculture. Unemployment hit 28% that fall, for men who'd grown up believing hard work guaranteed survival. Watching the economy abandon them felt like betrayal of everything they'd been promised. The young people were leaving, heading to Knoxville or Atlanta or anywhere that offered something beyond watching your father's legacy die. What remained were the stubborn, the old, and the desperate. People who couldn't leave, who wouldn't leave, who'd rather figure out how to survive in the ruins than abandon the only place they'd ever called home. In places like Hamblin County, the underground economy wasn't just a side hustle. It was survival itself. Moonshine operations hidden in hollows, where revenuers had stopped bothering to look. Illegal poker games in the back rooms of roadhouses where cash changed hands and the house took its cut off the top. Loan sharking, small-time theft, welfare fraud, anything that kept food on the table and the bank from foreclosing. The law said it was criminal. The mountains said it was practical, and in 1978, with no legitimate work available, practicality mattered more than legality. Highway 11E cut through the heart of this territory, a two-lane blacktop connecting Morristown to Bean Station, winding through hollows, where the same families had lived for 6 generations. Along that highway sat roadhouses with names like Buck's, the Dixie Diner, Red's Place, buildings that had started as general stores in the 1920s and evolved into bars where men went to forget how bad things had gotten. Inside those places, country music played from jukeboxes that still took quarters. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of cheap beer. Conversations happened in low voices because everybody knew everybody, and everybody's business was everybody else's entertainment. The parking lots were gravel, full of pickup trucks with rifle racks in the back windows, and bumper stickers proclaiming allegiances to the volunteers, or Jesus, or both. The trucks were Ford F-150s and Chevy C-10s, work vehicles with dented fenders and engines that ran on prayer and spare parts. These weren't showpieces, they were tools, necessary as hammers, maintained just well enough to keep running, because replacing them was impossible on wages that had stopped coming. At night, those parking lots became stages for violence that the law rarely investigated thoroughly. Bar fights that sent men to the emergency room in Morristown. Domestic disputes that ended with wives sporting black eyes. Occasional shootings over insults or women or debts. The sheriff's department was understaffed, underfunded, and generally understood that some things in the mountains were better left to sort themselves out. Call it mountain justice, call it the old ways, but the reality was simple. Raymond Thomas Carter was 49 years old that November. Though he looked closer to 60, he stood exactly 6 feet tall, but years of physical labor had given him a permanent forward stoop that made him appear shorter. His face was weathered like old boot leather, deep lines carved around his eyes from squinting into sun and welding sparks for 3 decades. A thick scar ran across the knuckles of his right hand, a souvenir from a sawmill accident in 1963 that had nearly cost him 2 fingers. The injury had healed crooked, leaving his hand with a permanent curl that made shaking hands an awkward gesture. His hands were massive, fingers thick as axe handles, calluses built up like armor from years of gripping wrenches and hauling transmission parts. Every morning, Raymond woke at 4:45 without an alarm clock. His body had learned the rhythm decades ago. He'd slip out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake Linda Sue, and make his way to the kitchen in the dark, navigating by memory through a house he'd lived in since birth. The kitchen was small, dominated by a wood stove his grandfather had installed in 1928. Raymond would build a fire using kindling he'd split the night before, wait for the flames to catch, then set an old percolator on the hottest part of the stovetop. While the coffee brewed, he'd roll cigarettes from a can of Prince Albert tobacco he kept on the kitchen table. His fingers moved automatically, spreading tobacco along thin papers, rolling tight cylinders that burned slow and even. He'd smoke one cigarette, standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the barn and the garage beyond, watching darkness slowly lift as dawn approached. The coffee would be ready by then, strong enough to strip paint, black as coal dust. He'd pour a cup, sit at the kitchen table his great-grandfather had built from oak, harvested on this property, and drink in silence. No radio, no television, just the sound of fire crackling in the stove and his own breathing. Raymond didn't use this time for planning or worrying. He used it for nothing, just sitting, existing, being present in the only moment that mattered, which was now. By 5:30, the coffee would be finished. He'd smoke a second cigarette, put on his coat and boots, and head outside to start his day. The house had been built by his grandfather in 1928, solid construction that had survived 5 decades of Tennessee weather without significant repair. Raymond had married Linda Sue Hendricks in 1952, right after his discharge from the Army. He'd served 2 years in Korea, come home with frostbite scars on his feet and nightmares he never discussed. Linda Sue was 17 when they married. He was 23. People said she was too young, but mountain girls married young back then. It was expected. They'd had 2 sons. Travis was 26 now, working at the garage alongside his father. Garrett was 24, doing construction work when he could find it, helping at the garage when he couldn't. Linda Sue was 47 that November, a thin woman whose face showed every hardship she'd endured. She'd buried both parents, watched 3 siblings move away to cities and never return, and lived with the knowledge that her husband's reputation kept them safe, but also isolated. People respected Raymond Carter, but they also feared him slightly. He was fair in business, honest in his dealings, but there was something about him that suggested crossing him would be a mistake you'd only make once. What Raymond valued most wasn't money, though God knew they needed it with the economy collapsing. What he valued was legacy. His great-grandfather had cleared this land in 1883, cutting timber by hand, pulling stumps with mules, building something from nothing. His grandfather had expanded the property, bought adjoining parcels during the Depression when land was cheap and cash was scarce. His father had turned part of the land into a tobacco farm, built the garage in 1947 to repair tractors and trucks for neighbors who couldn't afford mechanics in town. Raymond had continued that tradition. The garage on Highway 11E was his pride. A cinder block building with 2 bays, tools organized on walls, a wood stove for heat in winter. He specialized in transmissions, carburetors, brake work, the mechanical problems that kept rural trucks running. His rates were fair, his work was guaranteed, and his reputation was spotless. In 30 years of business, no one had ever accused Raymond Carter of cheating them. Not once. That reputation mattered to Raymond more than money ever could. In a place where your name was all you had, where banks wouldn't lend to mountain people and government assistance came wrapped in humiliation, reputation was currency. It was how you got credit at the general store when cash ran short, how you found work when jobs disappeared, how you survived when the system offered nothing. Raymond's philosophy was simple. A man's word is his bond. If you say you'll do something, you do it. October 14th, 1978. A Saturday night when autumn was sliding toward winter, and men with no work the next morning were looking for distraction from economic reality, pressing down like a physical weight. The illegal poker game at Buck's Roadhouse started at 8 p.m., organized by Buck Hensley himself, who ran the bar and took 10% of every pot in exchange for providing the space and keeping the law away. The back room was small, barely 15 feet square, with a single table that seated 8 comfortably, and 10 if you didn't mind elbows touching. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of whiskey. A single light bulb hung over the table, casting shadows that made reading faces difficult. The players were men Raymond had known for years. Dale Thompson and his brother Curtis, both in their 30s, small-time criminals who supplemented sporadic construction work with petty theft and marijuana sales. Jimmy Parsons, a mechanic from Bean Station. Bobby Jean Wilcox, who drove trucks when he could find loads. Michael Wayne Harris, who'd worked at the textile mill before it closed. 7 others, all local, all struggling, all looking to turn small stakes into enough money to matter. Raymond brought $500, money he'd saved from 3 months of garage work. Travis and Garrett came with $100 each. The buy-in was $50. The game was 5-card draw. Nothing wild. Straight poker where skill and luck fought for dominance. By midnight, Raymond was up $300. By 3 a.m., he'd doubled his stake. The other players were getting desperate, digging into wallets for bills they couldn't afford to lose, writing IOUs that Raymond accepted because refusing would have ended the game. Dale Thompson was down $400. Curtis had lost $600. The others had lost between $200 and $800 each. But poker has its own momentum. Desperation makes men take risks they'd normally avoid. And Raymond's luck was running hot as a welding torch. By 7 a.m., when dawn was breaking over the mountains and the game finally ended, Raymond Carter had won $8,700, the largest single win anyone at that table had ever witnessed. The money sat in front of him in crumpled bills and hastily written IOUs. 12 men owed him money. The amounts varied. Dale Thompson owed $725. Curtis owed $680. The others owed between $450 and $900 each. The total was staggering for men who earned maybe $12,000 yearly when work was available. The room had gone quiet when Raymond counted the final pot. 12 men sitting around a table in Buck's back room, smoke hanging in the air like guilt. The morning sun starting to filter through grimy windows. $8,700. More money than most of these men would see in a year. Raymond looked at each face, saw the exhaustion, the desperation, the dawning realization of what they'd just lost. He could have walked away, could have taken his winnings and left them to figure out how to explain missing rent money to wives and landlords. But that wasn't how Raymond Carter operated. "I'll give you 30 days, Raymond said, his voice flat and calm. November 13th. That's the deadline. Every man pays what he owes in full, no exceptions. Dale Thompson started to protest, started to say something about hard times and bad luck. But Raymond raised his hand. I didn't ask for your opinion. I'm telling you how this works. You sat at this table voluntarily. You played cards knowing the risks. You lost. Now you pay. Buck Hensley, who'd been watching from the doorway, brought out a bottle of whiskey and 12 shot glasses. Raymond understood what was coming. This was mountain tradition, older than Tennessee itself. You want them to swear it proper, Buck said. Then we do it proper. He poured 12 shots, set them in front of each debtor. Then he pulled out a folding knife, cleaned the blade with his shirt tail, and handed it to Raymond. Raymond stood, opened the knife, and drew the blade across his left palm. Blood welled up immediately, dripping onto the table. He didn't flinch, didn't react to the pain. He just held out his bleeding hand and looked at Dale Thompson. Swear it, Raymond said. Swear on your life you'll pay what you owe by November 13th. Dale hesitated, looking at the other men, hoping someone would object. No one did. They all understood. This was how debts were made, binding in places where contracts meant nothing, and courts were 60 miles away. Dale took the knife, cut his own palm, and gripped Raymond's hand. I swear, he said. $8,700 divided among 12 men, November 13th. I'll pay my share. One by one, the other 11 men cut their palms and shook Raymond's hand. Blood mixing with blood, witnessed by everyone present. Curtis Thompson, Jimmy Parsons, Bobby Jean Wilcox, Michael Wayne Harris. The others followed, each man swearing the same oath, each man pressing their bleeding palm against Raymond's, each man understanding that in these mountains, a blood oath wasn't symbolic. It was a contract written in flesh, witnessed by God and men, binding as death itself. When the last man had sworn, they drank the whiskey shots. Raymond wrapped his hand in a bar towel, gathered his winnings into a canvas bag. Dale Edward Thompson was 34 years old that October, built thick and strong like a man who'd done physical labor his whole life, but was starting to go soft around the middle from too much beer and too little work. He stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, 210 pounds, with a red beard he kept trimmed close and a scar across his left eyebrow from a bottle fight in 1974. His hands were rough, knuckles scarred from years of bar brawls and construction accidents. He'd worked sporadically as a carpenter, a roofer, whatever paid cash under the table. But mostly Dale Thompson was known as a man who took shortcuts, who looked for angles, who believed rules applied to other people. His younger brother Curtis was 32, taller at 6 feet, leaner, with the same red hair, but without the beard. Curtis had done 6 months in county jail in 1976 for possession of stolen tools, a sentence that had cost him his marriage and any legitimate job prospects. Since his release, he'd been living in a trailer on Dale's property, working odd jobs, selling marijuana to high school kids behind the Dairy Queen in Morristown. Curtis had a temper that Dale lacked. Where Dale would calculate and scheme, Curtis would react and fight. Together, they were a volatile combination of bad planning and worse execution. The Thompson brothers had grown up poor, even by Hamblin County standards. Their father had worked in the mines until black lung killed him in 1967. Their mother had cleaned houses for wealthy families in Knoxville until arthritis made holding a mop impossible. They'd learned early that the system didn't care about people like them, that rules were designed to keep poor people poor, and that the only way to get ahead was to take what you needed and worry about consequences later. They weren't evil men, not in the traditional sense. They were products of economic devastation and generational poverty, raised to believe that survival justified whatever methods got you through another winter. Dale had 3 children from 2 different women, neither of whom he'd married. He paid child support when he had money, ignored the obligation when he didn't. Curtis had no kids that he claimed, though rumors suggested otherwise. They lived in adjacent trailers on 10 acres of land their father had left them, property so worthless the bank hadn't bothered to foreclose when taxes went unpaid. What Dale and Curtis Thompson understood about Raymond Carter was limited and dangerously incomplete. They knew he ran a garage on Highway 11E. They knew he had a reputation for fairness in business. They knew he was older, slower, less physically dangerous than he'd been 20 years ago. What they didn't understand was that Raymond Carter's code wasn't flexible. October 15th, 1978. Raymond Carter woke at 4:45, as always, made his coffee, rolled his cigarettes, and sat at the kitchen table in the pre-dawn darkness. But this morning was different. The canvas bag with $8,700 sat on the table in front of him. He'd counted it 3 times the night before, separated the cash from the IOUs, recorded every debt in a spiral notebook with each man's name written in careful block letters. Dale Thompson, $725. Curtis Thompson, $680. The list continued down the page. Linda Sue came into the kitchen at 5:30, earlier than usual. She saw the money, saw the notebook, saw the white bandage wrapped around Raymond's left hand. She didn't ask questions. After 26 years of marriage, she knew her husband well enough to recognize when words were unnecessary. She made breakfast while Raymond sat silently, staring at the list of names. When the food was ready, she set it in front of him. "You expecting trouble?" she said. Not a question, a statement. "I expect men to honor their word," Raymond replied. "Whether they do or not, that's their choice." He ate methodically, eggs and bacon and biscuits with gravy, the same breakfast he'd eaten for 49 years. When he finished, he put on his coat and boots and walked out to the garage. Travis and Garrett were already there, having arrived before dawn. They'd been at the poker game. They'd witnessed the blood oath. They understood what was coming. The days passed slowly. Raymond worked on transmissions and brake jobs, changed oil, replaced spark plugs, did the routine mechanical work that kept the garage running, but every morning he marked another day off the calendar. October 16th, 17th, 18th. The deadline was November 13th. 30 days from the oath. He expected payment to start arriving within a week. The men knew where to find him. The garage was open 6 days a week, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. He'd be there, waiting. By October 23rd, 8 days after the poker game, no one had paid. Not a dollar, not a phone call, not even an acknowledgement that the debt existed. Raymond sat at his kitchen table that night, the spiral notebook open in front of him. Linda Sue was washing dishes, her back to him. "They're not going to pay," she said quietly. "You know that, don't you?" Raymond didn't answer immediately. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "Then they'll learn what a blood oath means," he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather or the price of gasoline. November 1st, 1978. 12 days before the deadline. Raymond sent Travis into town with messages for each of the 12 men who owed money. The messages were simple. Handwritten notes delivered in sealed envelopes. 12 days remain. Honor your oath. Travis drove to Dale Thompson's trailer first, knocked on the door at 10 a.m. Dale answered wearing sweatpants and no shirt, clearly just woken up. Travis handed him the envelope. Dale opened it, read the note, and laughed. "Your daddy serious with this?" he asked. "Dead serious," Travis replied. Dale crumpled the note and tossed it onto the floor. "Tell Raymond Carter he can go to hell. That poker game was rigged and everybody knows it. I'm not paying a damn thing." Travis delivered 11 more envelopes that day. The responses varied. Some men were apologetic, explaining they didn't have the money, promising to pay eventually. Others were defiant like Dale, claiming the game was unfair, threatening violence if Raymond pushed the issue. 2 men had already left town, their families saying they'd gone to Knoxville looking for work. Curtis Thompson's response was the most troubling. He'd been drinking when Travis arrived at 2 p.m. He invited Travis inside the trailer, offered him a beer, and then said something that Travis would remember for the rest of his life. "Your daddy's an old man living in the past. Blood oaths don't mean nothing in 1978. Tell him if he keeps pushing this, he might find out what happens when you threaten the wrong people." Travis reported back to Raymond that evening. They sat in the garage after closing, Raymond on a stool by the workbench, Travis leaning against a Ford pickup they'd been rebuilding. Raymond listened to every response without interruption, his face showing no emotion. When Travis finished, Raymond was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. "They think I'm bluffing," he said. "They think because I'm 49 years old and run a garage that I won't follow through. They don't understand that a man's word is the only thing that matters. Without that, you're nothing. You're just meat taking up space." November 10th, 1978. 3 days before the deadline. Raymond sent Travis with a final message. This one was different. No sealed envelope, no written note. Travis was instructed to tell each man face to face. November 13th is the deadline. If you haven't paid by midnight, the debt will be collected another way. 7 of the 12 men actually answered their doors. Their reactions ranged from nervous laughter to outright hostility. Dale Thompson told Travis to tell his father that he and Curtis had friends, that Raymond should be careful about making threats he couldn't back up. November 12th, 1978, 24 hours before the deadline. Raymond Carter sat at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, a pen, and the spiral notebook containing the 12 names. It was 7 p.m. Linda Sue was in the living room watching television. Travis and Garrett sat across from their father, waiting. Raymond had called them to the house after dinner. He hadn't explained why. They knew anyway. The deadline was approaching. No one had paid. Something had to happen. Raymond's moral framework didn't allow for unanswered betrayal. Raymond began writing names on the legal pad, copying them from the spiral notebook. Dale Thompson at the top. Curtis Thompson second. Then Jimmy Parsons, Bobby Jean Wilcox, Michael Wayne Harris. The list continued until all 12 names were recorded in Raymond's careful block letters. Next to each name, he wrote an address. Dale Thompson, trailer on Dockery Road. Curtis Thompson, same location. Jimmy Parsons, house on Route 25 near Bean Station. The addresses were specific, detailed from years of living in these counties and knowing where everyone lived. After the addresses, Raymond added notes. Dale Thompson, usually at Buck's Roadhouse Friday and Saturday nights. Curtis Thompson, same. Jimmy Parsons, works until 5 p.m. at Garage in Bean Station. Stops at Dixie Diner most evenings around 6. The notes continued, cataloging habits and patterns that Raymond had observed over years of casual interaction. These men weren't strangers. They were neighbors, acquaintances, men Raymond had known for decades. That familiarity would make what came next possible. Raymond set down his pen and looked at his sons. Travis was 26, solid and dependable, raised to believe that honor mattered more than comfort. Garrett was 24, quieter than his brother, but equally committed to the code their father had taught them. "You understand what this means," Raymond said. It wasn't a question. Both sons nodded. They swore an oath. They broke it. Now we collect the debt, the only way left to us. Travis spoke first. "You're talking about mailing them." Raymond didn't flinch from the word. "I'm talking about justice. The law won't help us. Gambling debts aren't enforceable in court. The sheriff won't get involved. We're on our own." A blood oath was sworn with witnesses. They chose to break it. The consequences were always implied. Garrett asked the practical question. "How do we do this without getting caught?" Raymond turned the legal pad around so his sons could see the names and notes. "We do it methodically. 3 men, 3 days, 12 targets. We use hunting rifles and shotguns. All legal, all registered to me. November 13th, 1978. Raymond Carter woke at 4:45 a.m., as he had every morning for 30 years. He built the fire in the kitchen stove, set the percolator on to boil, and rolled 3 cigarettes from his can of Prince Albert tobacco. But this morning carried weight that other mornings didn't. Today was the deadline. 30 days since the blood oath at Buck's Roadhouse. 30 days for 12 men to honor their word. By noon, Raymond would know if those oaths meant anything or if he'd have to enforce consequences that couldn't be undone. He sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, the yellow legal pad in front of him, with 12 names written in careful block letters. The spiral notebook lay beside it, showing amounts owed: $725, $680. The numbers that had seemed so important 4 weeks ago now felt almost irrelevant. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about whether a man's word carried weight in a world that increasingly suggested it didn't. Raymond smoked his first cigarette slowly, watching dawn break over the ridgeline beyond his barn. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that promised rain. Temperature was 38 degrees, cold enough that his breath fogged when he'd stepped outside to check the thermometer. At 6 a.m., Linda Sue came into the kitchen. She'd been awake for an hour, lying in bed, listening to her husband move through his morning routine. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. The legal pad with its list of names was visible between them. "You're really going to do this," she said. Not a question, just acknowledgement of reality. Raymond met her eyes. They had 30 days. They chose not to pay. They chose to break an oath, sworn in blood with witnesses. The consequences were always clear. "You'll go to prison," Linda Sue said. "You know that, Travis and Garrett too. You'll destroy this family to prove a point about honor." Raymond crushed out his cigarette in the ashtray. "This family is built on honor. Take that away. And we're just animals, surviving day to day with no meaning. I'd rather go to prison as a man who kept his word than live free as someone who let betrayal go unanswered." The phone rang at 8 a.m. Raymond answered on the second ring. It was Buck Hensley calling from the Roadhouse. "Raymond, it's Buck. Listen, some of the boys are talking. They're saying you're planning something. I'm calling to tell you, whatever you're thinking, don't do it. It's not worth it." Raymond's voice was calm when he replied. "Did any of them call to say they're paying what they owe?" Silence on the other end. "That's what I thought. Thanks for calling, Buck." By noon, the deadline had officially passed. No payments arrived. No phone calls came. No one knocked on Raymond's door with cash or apologies. The deadline expired in silence, November 13th, 1 p.m. Raymond walked out to the garage where Travis and Garrett were waiting. The building was cold despite the wood stove burning in the corner. Raymond unlocked the tool cabinet in the back room, the one he kept padlocked because it didn't contain tools. Inside were 3 firearms: a Remington Model 700 bolt-action rifle chambered in .30-06, a Winchester 12-gauge pump shotgun, a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun. All 3 weapons were legal, registered in Raymond's name, used for deer hunting every fall. Raymond had owned them for years. They were maintained meticulously, cleaned after every use, stored properly with ammunition kept separate. He set the guns on the workbench. From a metal ammunition box, he removed shells, .30-06 rifle rounds, copper-jacketed, 150 grain, 12-gauge double-aught buckshot. He counted out exactly what would be needed: 12 rifle rounds, 24 shotgun shells. The mathematics of violence reduced to simple inventory. Travis and Garrett stood watching as their father inspected each weapon. Raymond worked the rifle's bolt, checking that it cycled smoothly. He pumped the shotguns, listening for any mechanical hesitation. Everything functioned perfectly. These were tools, no different than wrenches or hammers designed for specific purposes. "We do this clean," Raymond said, his voice matter-of-fact. "No suffering, no torture, no games. We find them, we tell them why, and we finish it. This isn't about cruelty, it's about justice. They understand the terms. They chose to break the oath. Now they face the consequences." He assigned weapons. Travis would carry the Remington rifle. Garrett would take the Winchester shotgun. Raymond would use the Mossberg. They loaded the vehicles. Travis's Ford pickup, blue, 1974 model. Garrett's Chevy truck, brown, 1976. Raymond's Dodge, green, 1973. 3 trucks, common as dirt in eastern Tennessee, wouldn't draw attention on back roads at night. Linda Sue came out to the garage at 2 p.m. carrying a cooler. Inside were sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, thermoses of coffee, bottles of water. She'd packed enough food for 3 men for 3 days. She set the cooler in Raymond's truck without speaking. Raymond walked over, put his hand on her shoulder. "We'll be back when it's done," he said. Linda Sue nodded. Her eyes were dry. She'd cried earlier, alone in the bedroom where no one could see. Now she was past tears. "Just come home," she said. At 3 p.m., Raymond gathered his sons in the garage one final time. He spread the legal pad on the workbench. The 12 names stared up at them. "We start tonight," Raymond said. "Dale and Curtis Thompson first. They were the loudest about not paying. They disrespected the oath publicly. They go first. We'll find them at Buck's Roadhouse. Friday night, they'll be drinking. November 13th, 9:20 p.m. The parking lot at Buck's Roadhouse held 11 vehicles, mostly pickup trucks with a few sedans scattered among them. The building sat 50 yards off Highway 11E, surrounded by gravel parking and nothing else. The nearest house was half a mile away. The nearest street light was a mile in either direction. The only illumination came from a single mercury vapor lamp mounted on a pole near the front entrance and the neon Budweiser sign glowing in the front window. Raymond's Dodge sat in the darkness beyond the parking lot's edge, engine off, windows down, so they could hear anyone approaching. Curtis Thompson's truck was parked under the mercury lamp. A 1976 Ford with a dented passenger door and a cracked windshield. Dale's truck was beside it, a 1975 Chevy with primer spots covering rust holes. Raymond, Travis, and Garrett had been waiting for 40 minutes. They'd arrived at 8:40, parked in the shadows, and settled in to watch. Inside the Roadhouse, music played, muffled through walls but recognizable as country. Merle Haggard singing about Mama Tried. Occasional bursts of laughter carried across the parking lot when the door opened. At 9:35, the Roadhouse door opened. Curtis Thompson stepped out, alone, laughing at something someone inside had said. He was drunk, stumbling slightly as he walked toward his truck. He wore blue jeans and a denim jacket, work boots that scraped against gravel. He was fumbling for his keys, patting his pockets, when Raymond stepped out of the darkness. Curtis turned, startled, tried to focus on who was approaching. Recognition took a moment. "Raymond Carter," Curtis said, his words slurred. "The hell you doing here?" "You owe me $680, Raymond said. His voice was calm, conversational almost. "The deadline was noon today. You didn't pay." Curtis laughed, a sound without humor. "I told your boy I'm not paying. That poker game was rigged. Besides, what are you going to do about it, old man? Sue me." Raymond raised the Mossberg shotgun. Curtis saw it, his eyes widening, alcohol-delayed reflexes trying to process danger. "Wait," Curtis said. "Wait, we can talk about this. I'll get you the money. I just need more time." "Time expired at noon," Raymond said. "You swore an oath. You broke it. There's only one consequence for that." Curtis tried to run. He turned, took 3 steps toward the Roadhouse door, was opening his mouth to yell for help when Raymond pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast was enormous in the quiet parking lot. Curtis fell forward, hitting the gravel face first. Raymond, walked closer, fired a second shot. Then silence. No screams from inside the Roadhouse. The music was too loud. No one had heard. Travis and Garrett appeared from the shadows. November 13th, 10:40 p.m. Dale Thompson left Buck's Roadhouse with two friends, Jimmy Parsons and Bobby Jean Wilcox. All three men were drunk, laughing, arguing about something that wouldn't matter in 5 minutes. They crossed the parking lot toward their trucks. Dale was still talking when he noticed Curtis's body lying near his Ford. The laughter stopped. Dale ran forward, knelt beside his brother, rolled him over. Curtis's chest was destroyed, blood soaking into gravel. Dale started screaming for help, turning to look for whoever had done this. Raymond stepped into the light from the mercury vapor lamp. The Mossberg was raised, pointed at Dale's chest. "You owe $725, Raymond said. "Your brother owed $680. Neither of you paid. The debt's being collected." Dale tried to stand, slipped in his brother's blood, fell backward. "You crazy son of a bitch," he shouted. "You killed Curtis over money, over a goddamn poker game." Raymond's expression didn't change. "Over a blood oath. You swore it with witnesses. You broke it. This is the consequence." Jimmy Parsons tried to run. He was 10 feet away, heading for his truck, when Travis shot him with the Remington rifle. The .30-06 round hit Jimmy in the back, dropped him instantly. He was dead before his face hit the gravel. Bobby Jean Wilcox stood frozen, hands raised, sobbing. "Please," he said, "please, I'll pay. I've got $400 at home. I was going to bring it tomorrow, I swear." Garrett walked up behind Bobby Jean, put the Winchester shotgun against the back of his head. "Tomorrow was too late," Garrett said. "The deadline was noon." One shot. Bobby Jean fell. Dale Thompson was still on the ground, covered in his brother's blood, when Raymond aimed the Mossberg at his face. "Any last words?" Raymond asked. Dale spit blood. "I hope you burn in hell, Carter." Raymond pulled the trigger. The parking lot was silent, except for the muffled music still playing inside Buck's Roadhouse. 4 men dead in less than 90 minutes. Raymond, Travis, and Garrett walked back to their trucks, engines starting in near simultaneous rumble. They drove away using back roads, no headlights, navigating by memory through terrain they'd known their entire lives. By 11:15 p.m., they were 15 miles away at a spot Raymond had chosen earlier, an abandoned barn on property that had been foreclosed 3 years ago. They wiped down the shotguns and rifle, cleaned blood off their boots, changed shirts. The bloody clothes went into a metal barrel. Raymond poured kerosene over them and struck a match. They watched the flames consume evidence, orange light flickering against barn walls. 8 more names, Raymond said. November 14th, 6:30 a.m., Hamblin. County Sheriff Tom Bradshaw received the call at home while eating breakfast. 4 bodies discovered at Buck's Roadhouse. All adults, all male, all shot. Bradshaw was 58 years old, sheriff for 16 years, and in his entire career, he'd investigated maybe 6 homicides. 4 in one night was unprecedented. He called for backup, notified the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and drove to Buck's Roadhouse with his stomach churning. What he found was carnage. Curtis Thompson and Dale Thompson dead near Curtis's truck. Jimmy Parsons dead 20 feet away. Bobby Jean Wilcox dead near his vehicle. Spent shotgun shells and one rifle casing scattered across the gravel. By 8 a.m., the parking lot was swarming with law enforcement. County deputies, state police, TBI investigators in suits and ties, taking photographs, measuring distances, marking evidence with little yellow markers. The medical examiner arrived at 8:30, a tired-looking man named Harrison, who'd been doing this job for 23 years. He examined the bodies where they lay, taking notes on a clipboard. "Execution style," Harrison said to Bradshaw. "Shooter or shooters were close range, no hesitation. Professional almost, if you can call murder professional." Buck Hensley, who'd discovered the bodies, when he came out to open at 6 a.m., sat in a patrol car giving his statement. He'd heard nothing the night before. The music was too loud. The Roadhouse's back wall faced the parking lot. By the time he'd locked up at midnight, the bodies were already there, but he'd left through the front entrance. He'd seen nothing, heard nothing. The TBI investigators asked about enemies, about who might want these men dead. Buck hesitated, then told them about the poker game 4 weeks ago, about Raymond Carter's big win, about the blood oath, about the debts owed. By 9 a.m., 3 TBI agents were driving toward Raymond Carter's property on Highway 11E. They arrived to find Raymond sitting on his front porch, drinking coffee from a ceramic mug, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. He watched the vehicles approach with no visible concern. The lead agent, a man named Patterson, who'd been with TBI for 11 years, stepped out first. "Raymond Carter," Patterson said. "We need to talk to you about 4 men killed last night at Buck's Roadhouse. Curtis Thompson, Dale Thompson, Jimmy Parsons, Bobby Jean Wilcox. You know these men?" Raymond took a drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly. "I knew them," he said. "They owed me money from a poker game. They swore a blood oath to pay by yesterday at noon. They didn't pay." The directness shocked Patterson. No denial, no lawyer requests, just calm admission. "Are you saying you killed them?" Patterson asked. Raymond set down his coffee mug. "I'm saying they broke an oath. I'm saying there are consequences for that. I'm saying 8 more men owe me money. If they don't pay, they'll face the same consequences." November 14th, 9:45 a.m. TBI agent Patterson stood on Raymond Carter's porch, trying to process what he'd just heard, a confession delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Behind Patterson, 2 other agents had their hands near their service weapons, unsure whether Raymond represented an immediate threat. Inside the house, Linda Sue Carter watched through the kitchen window. Travis and Garrett were in the garage, also watching. The entire property felt like a coiled spring waiting to release. "Raymond Carter, I'm placing you under arrest for the murders of Curtis Thompson, Dale Thompson, Jimmy Parsons, and Bobby Jean Wilcox," Patterson said, pulling handcuffs from his belt. Raymond stood slowly, set his coffee mug on the porch railing, and crushed out his cigarette. "You're welcome to try," he said calmly. "But I'm telling you right now, I'm not finished. 8 men still owe me money. 8 men still need to honor their blood oath. You can arrest me, but you can't stop what's already in motion." Patterson moved forward with the handcuffs. Raymond didn't resist. He turned, placed his hands behind his back, allowed himself to be cuffed. As Patterson was leading him toward the TBI vehicle, Travis and Garrett emerged from the garage. Both carried hunting rifles, not pointed at anyone, just held casually, the way men in rural Tennessee carried rifles every day during hunting season. But the message was clear. "You arresting our father," Travis called out. Patterson stopped, his hand moving toward his holster. "Put those rifles down now," he ordered. "These are legal firearms on private property," Garrett replied. "We're not threatening anyone. We're just observing. You're taking our father. We want to make sure it's done proper." The standoff lasted maybe 15 seconds, though it felt longer. Finally, Patterson made a decision. Getting Raymond into custody was the priority. Escalating into a shootout wouldn't help anyone. He guided Raymond into the back seat of the TBI vehicle, shut the door, and drove away. Travis and Garrett watched until the cars disappeared down Highway 11E. At the Hamblin County Jail, Raymond was processed. Fingerprints taken, photographs shot from multiple angles, personal effects inventoried. One wallet containing $83. One pocket knife. One ring of keys. A pack of Prince Albert tobacco. Book of rolling papers. A lighter. Raymond answered questions with the same calm directness he'd shown on his porch. Yes, he'd killed those 4 men. Yes, he'd planned it. Yes, he'd do it again. When asked about the other 8 men on his list, Raymond simply said, "They have a choice. Pay what they owe or face the consequences." By noon, word had spread through the Tri-County area. Raymond Carter was in custody. 4 men were dead. 8 more were potential targets. The remaining debtors panicked. Michael Wayne Harris packed his truck and left for his sister's house in Virginia. 2 others, whose names were Robert McKenzie and Carl Stevens, drove to the jail and paid their debts in full. November 14th, 2 p.m., Raymond Carter sat in a holding cell in the Hamblin County Jail while his arraignment was being arranged. Bond hearings scheduled for the following morning. But outside the jail, in hollows and towns, across 3 counties, 8 men were trying to decide whether to run or pay. The ones who'd laughed at Raymond's demands 4 weeks ago weren't laughing anymore. 4 corpses in the medical examiner's office proved Raymond Carter didn't make idle threats. The blood oath wasn't symbolic, it was a contract enforced with shotguns. Michael Wayne Harris made it to Virginia by nightfall. He called his wife from a payphone, told her to pack essentials and meet him in Roanoke. He wasn't coming back to Tennessee until Raymond Carter was executed or died of old age, whichever came first. Robert McKenzie and Carl Stevens, who'd paid their debts that afternoon, felt safer but not safe. They'd honored their obligation, but they'd also seen what Raymond was capable of. They bought shotguns from the hardware store and started sleeping with loaded weapons beside their beds. But 6 men remained on Raymond's list who hadn't paid and hadn't run. 6 men who either couldn't leave families behind or didn't believe Raymond could reach them from a jail cell. That belief proved fatal. November 15th, 7:15 a.m., Raymond Carter was released on $250,000 bond. The decision shocked prosecutors. Judge Warren Miller explained that Raymond wasn't a flight risk, had lived in Hamblin County his entire life, owned property, and had surrendered peacefully. The prosecution argued he was a danger to the community. The judge acknowledged that concern but cited Tennessee law requiring reasonable bond for non-capital offenses. Raymond walked out of the jail at 8 a.m. Travis and Garrett were waiting in the parking lot. They drove home in silence. By 9 a.m., Raymond was sitting at his kitchen table with the yellow legal pad. 6 names remained. He circled them with his pen. The phone rang at 9:30. It was Buck Hensley. "Raymond, listen to me. You need to stop this. You're going to get yourself killed or locked up forever. Is that really worth $8,000? Raymond's response was quiet but firm. "It's not about the money, Buck. It never was. It's about honor. These men swore an oath. They have to pay." November 15th and 16th became a blur of violence that Tennessee law enforcement couldn't stop. 2 men shot outside a grocery store in Bean Station. 1 man ambushed on a logging road near Thornhill. Another killed in his driveway while loading his truck for work. The methods were identical. Close range, shotgun or rifle, no witnesses. Raymond, Travis, and Garrett moved through the mountains like ghosts, using back roads and family land, timing their strikes when targets were isolated. By November 17th, 11 of 12 men on Raymond's list were dead. Only James Whitfield remained alive, having fled to his brother's house in Knoxville and refusing to leave. The FBI joined the manhunt that morning, establishing roadblocks throughout the Tri-County area. By noon, Raymond Carter's farm was surrounded by 50 law enforcement officers. Helicopters circled overhead, snipers positioned on ridges. Raymond sat on his front porch, the Mossberg shotgun across his lap, drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. Linda Sue was inside, calm. Travis and Garrett stood in the yard, unarmed now, understanding this was the end. The standoff lasted 6 hours. Negotiators tried talking Raymond into surrender. He refused to respond. Finally, at 6 p.m., as darkness fell, Raymond stood. He laid the shotgun on the porch, raised his hands, and walked toward the police line. Travis and Garrett followed. All 3 were arrested without resistance. Raymond's only statement was, 11 out of 12. That's a passing grade. The trial began in March 1979. Raymond, Travis, and Garrett faced 11 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: ballistic matches, witness testimony, Raymond's own confession. The defense argued cultural context, mountain justice, the sanctity of blood oaths in Appalachian tradition. The jury deliberated 8 days. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Raymond Carter received life without parole. Travis and Garrett each received 40 years. None filed appeals. Raymond told his lawyer, "I did what honor required. The legal system doesn't recognize that. I accept the consequences." He was transferred to Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Petros, Tennessee. Travis and Garrett went to different facilities. Linda Sue visited monthly until her death in 1993 from heart failure. She was 62 years old. The 11 dead men left behind 27 children and 11 widows. Families shattered by gambling debts and honor codes that valued pride over life. Several children grew up in foster care. Most left Tennessee as adults, wanting nothing to do with the place that had destroyed their families. Dale Thompson's son wrote a book in 2005 titled The Blood Debt: condemning both his father's choices and Raymond's violence. The Carter property was sold in 2001, demolished in 2008. Today it's an empty lot where nothing grows quite right. Raymond Carter died in prison November 19, 2019, age 90. His last words to Travis during a visit: "We did what was right. No remorse, no regrets." Travis and Garrett were released in 2019 and 2021. Both live quietly in Tennessee. James Whitfield, the one who survived by fleeing, died in 2015 in Oregon, having never returned to Tennessee. Was Raymond Carter a mass murderer? Yes. 11 men executed with premeditation. Was he defending sacred honor in a world where codes mattered more than law? Also, yes. The uncomfortable truth is both can be true simultaneously. 41 years later, the questions remain. What would we do if honor demanded violence? Where's the line between justice and murder? Does a blood oath sworn in desperation carry weight, or was this simply 11 deaths over $8,700 that could never be worth 11 lives? If this story made you think about honor, codes, and prices we pay when systems fail, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe for more true stories challenging what we know about right and wrong. Comment below, what would you have done in Raymond Carter's position? Because these stories aren't history. They're happening now in forgotten places where codes replace law and honor demands blood. Until next time, remember, monsters aren't born. They're made one broken oath, one desperate decision at a time. And the line between justice and vengeance exists not in law books, but in human hearts, where it's always been thinnest, always easiest to cross, always hardest to find our way back from.